Thank you, everybody, for joining. We are thrilled that you took the time to do this. Time is not something you have in abundance, and we know that, so we don't take it for granted. Thank you so much for joining us for Reversing Revenue Declines, Strategies that Boost Enrollment, Attendance, and Graduation. So, about our speakers today, if you've joined any of these before, you may see familiar faces in Simone and myself, but we have the extreme pleasure of having Patty Moon join us today. She has served as the Chief Communications Officer for Aurora Public Schools since September 2016, which is a while. Patty, you've seen a lot in those few years. She first joined APS as the Public Information Officer in March 2014. Prior to working for the district, Patty was a television journalist who worked in Colorado Springs, Oklahoma City, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. She was a TV reporter and anchor who covered stories on a wide range of topics, including education, health, and crime. Patty also serves the Aurora community as a board director for the Aurora Mental Health Center, which she joined in 2021. She earned both her bachelor's and master's degrees in journalism from Northwestern University. She's fluent in Korean and speaks French conversationally. Patty is a Colorado native who graduated from Lakewood High School. She and her husband love exploring the world through food, music, and stories. Patty, yeah, you really just sat back on your laurels, haven't you? Like, Patty's done a lot. We're so happy that you're joining us today. Simone and I both work on the Talking Points team. Simone's been in education for a long time, 20 years, and his real passion is bringing a voice from students as they learn to navigate their journey and discover their place in the world. He has served as a middle and high school teacher for 15 years in New Mexico and Oregon, and has also served in site and district leadership as a principal and then a district leader. We're really happy to have you join as well, Simone. And then myself, again, I think I've hit 25 years this year, 15 years as a teacher, 10 years in district leadership, but also ed tech for the past number of years, looking to broaden my impact and frankly, bring an asset lens to our students. So today, reversing revenue declines. This does matter. People don't go into education because of a fiscal imperative. But the truth of the matter is, without the funding that schools need, they are not able to run the programming that leads to the moral imperative that brought us all into this field. So we are going to talk today about strategies that help boost enrollment, attendance, and graduation. And why I focus on enrollment and attendance in relation to revenue. Anybody in school finance understands the connection between the two. We need students in schools that helps attribute to a big chunk of the funding that school districts receive. So how can we make sure that students are there, that they're learning, and most importantly, that they're successful, get to graduation, but then the success is measured after that in them becoming contributors to their community through whatever path they choose. So during our time together, we're going to talk about a few things. State of schools in 2022. Wow, we're here. It's been a lot. We've been through a lot. What do schools look like now? And then funding loss, things that have contributed to funding loss for school districts. And then most importantly, the bulk of the presentation where we're going to be learning from Patty and Simone, having done work practically in schools for a long time. What are the strategies we can use to boost attendance, enrollment, and graduation? We'll move into a little Q&A session, and then just the last few minutes, you'll hear a little bit more about talking points. State of schools. Here we are. In 2015, something anyone listening is probably familiar with, but that is when ESSA passed, so the Every Student Succeeds Act. It's funny in my time in education how each state says, it's crazy, we've got these metrics we're being held accountable to in Colorado, in Nevada, in Louisiana. The truth of the matter is all of them have their roots here. So if these metrics don't look familiar, you may not be in an American school system, but Every Student Kindergarten Ready, reading by third grade, that one has swept our nation, algebra by eighth grade, graduating on time, college and career ready, and closing the gap. That is what we have been told are the big metrics school systems should be held accountable to. It's how we get there where the art comes in, though, so that we can meet these metrics. So COVID happened. Yeah, I bet you thought maybe we'll get through one presentation without hearing the word COVID. Maybe one more year and we'll be done with it a little bit. But COVID happened. We know how schools responded. I've said many times over the last 3 years, I've never been more proud to have been associated with a profession than I have over the last 3 years with the profession of teaching. So thank you to everybody listening, all of you teachers, the support staff in schools outside of teaching staff. Incredible. You've sort of moved into the driver's seat in a lot of ways. Site leaders and district leaders, thank you for everything that you've done. And the thing we've realized now coming into this year is that we're never really going back to how things were pre-COVID. And a lot of that is a good thing. A lot of that is also a really hard thing that we're going to help address today through some of the strategies that we're going to be presenting. And schools have changed. Guess what? ESSA's the same. We still want to make sure our students end up college and career ready and that they have equal access to opportunity, which is what's represented by closing the gap. We still need to be aiming in the right direction for our students. How we get there might be a little bit different. So the funding loss, it's there. You if you haven't heard the word fiscal cliff, is there nothing more inspiring in education than the words fiscal cliff coming in 2024? It's pretty much everywhere now. Stimulus funding will be ending. The CARES Act dollars will be expiring. What do things look like for us in schools? And how can we have strategies not just to compensate for funding loss, but to accelerate ourselves way beyond wherever we could have been without the sort of crisis moments we've had over the last few years? There's opportunity here like no opportunity we've ever had in schools before. And this past week, I've heard from a lot of district leaders, please don't let things go back. This is our chance. Disruption presents opportunity. Let's take advantage of it. But we have to address things like funding in order to get there. So the situation's changed. It's continuing to change, but ESSA requirements remain the same. We sort of feel like we're in this daily Plinko board. I'm absolutely dating myself, hopefully along with a few of you out there. But the old Plinko board, we don't know exactly where things are going to fall, but we do know that our goal for students is the same, and ESSA has remained in place and the requirements of ESSA. How does this all affect funding, though, the things that have happened? And how will decreases in funding affect the goal that we have for all of our students? So dollars were gained. We all saw dollars gained in districts in absolutely insanely variable amounts, depending on a lot of factors in school districts. We got the CARES Act dollars in some form. Some school districts got $252. Some got millions. It depended on a lot of different things. But we are dealing with now some acute funding issues that have come out of COVID. Kids are missing. We actually have, we've always known students have left school districts in different geographies for different reasons, but we really kind of knew what the reasons were. It's a little more mysterious now. We literally have some enrollment decline in some districts where we're not exactly sure where students have gone. So enrollment has dropped. Attendance is more sporadic than it was before. It was more predictable before, which in some ways, not such a good thing. There were students who we knew were going to be chronically absent. That's a little bit hard to deal with as well, to know that it's going to happen and not necessarily have an answer. But now it's more sporadic. And frankly, more sporadic moves the urgency to deal with it up a little bit. It's a little more unpredictable. We have to be more systemic in how we're going to address it. And families and schools aren't completely on the same page, just across the country. We see some divide between schools and families and some friction in some cases. So we want to help give strategies to address these three things that ultimately really affect your funding. And what happens when funding's affected? Programming for students is affected. Here's the joy in it all, and we've been saying this for a long time, but we are starting to see this. Simone and I have the joy of working with school districts all over the country every day. We get to hear some of the most innovative, fabulous solutions and strategies. Patty's district in Aurora is one of those. So we're excited Patty can join, but we want to cross-pollinate those ideas to everybody. So here's our opportunity. Disruption is opportunity. So let's talk about some of the strategies that we've seen. Let's get to the meat and potatoes of all of this. Here are some questions that are going to guide what we're going to do. Why are students not coming to school? Why is it that attendance is sporadic? Why is it that we see more students chronically absent than maybe we did before? And then why are families leaving my district? What about enrollment? We all know there's some date in October in most states where you count the number of students enrolled, and that helps determine your funding for the year. Those numbers dropped severely in some districts this year. Why? Where are they going? And how do we not only attract and retain those families, but have them help attract other families to come to your district. And how can communication help me keep families and attract them? What does communication have to do with this objective that we have? And what are efforts and data points I can measure to help overall funding and meet requirements for funding? So these are the four big questions. We'll have strategies attached to the answer for each of these. So where have all the students? What is happening with students? Why we all knew during COVID why attendance seemed so sporadic and why keeping track of attendance was a difficult thing. We have a better handle on things now. So we have better ways of documenting that attendance is sporadic. But our goal isn't just to measure it, it's to impact attendance for students. So attendance really has a direct correlation to every school improvement initiative focused on improving student proficiency. We've said for a long time, if we don't have access to students, how are we going to meet those objectives with our students? It's sort of almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They need to exist in our space in order for us to have impact on outcomes for students. And although we have attendance interventions in place, we're not seeing sustained improvement for many of our families. So we'll talk strategies, and then most importantly, I'm going to turn a couple of questions over to Patty and to Simone from their real life practical experience. What have they seen work? So when we are addressing barriers and root causes for challenges, such as attendance and graduation rate, punitive systems only widen the gap. We have hopefully all realized that isn't the answer. And frankly, those are the answers we posed to the past to questions about attendance. It was more of you hit 10, now go into this system. We're going to keep moving things along through a consequence-based system until we improve your attendance. It's never been effective. It is even more so not effective now. So what can we do instead? And then we need to help students see a pathway to the future. They really need to know that I'm coming to school every day because it's a step in a direction somewhere, not just to get enough credit so I can graduate. That really isn't our end goal for students anymore. College and Career Ready is written into all of your mission statements. I could probably read your mission statements because they're similar enough. We want school to be a launch pad into the future for students, and that the success of K-12 really is going to be measured post-graduation. That's how we're going to ultimately see how successful we were in the K-12 system. And teachers are not the only staff members who work with students. Newsflash. One of the great things to come out of the last few years is that student services and support staff who used to feel a little like the passenger seat to the driver's seat of teaching and learning and teachers, we're now co-pilots in all of this. So how do we make sure that we are leveraging the skill sets of our support staff, because we need them more than ever right now? And then let's really look at unintended consequences of some of your practices. For example, reporting absences. Do your families have a barrier-free way to report the reason students are missing from your schools? For two reasons. Once you know the reason, you can help address the reason. But number two, when families don't have a way to communicate the reason for absence for a student, those absences stay unexcused. Once students hit a certain number of unexcused absences, they're technically truant and they enter the legal system. Those students don't have the best trajectory from that point on. They're very at risk for not graduating once they hit truancy state. So what are we doing to help make a barrier-free mechanism for your families to give reasons for absence? So with that, I am going to stop talking for a moment. I bet we're all a little bit grateful. Let's change it up a little bit. So Patty and Simone, what are ways school staff can work with families to improve attendance? What have you seen happen? What have you seen work?
Well, Kate, I think first, making clear to families why attendance is important. So sharing some of the data around, right, why we need your student at school every day. Let's start with that. And then two, making sure that we're digging in with families on why attendance might be a challenge. So what are the barriers that those families are currently facing? And then how can school staff support families in addressing some of those barriers? So an example I think of is an older sibling may be struggling with attendance because they're helping with childcare for younger siblings. If that's the case, are there community resources that we can connect that family with so that the older student can make sure they're attending school every day? But really, understanding the barriers and then problem solving together around those barriers, I think, are key.
Great, thank you. Patty, and then Simone.
Hey, yeah, I'm gonna approach this at some of the lessons I learned and the mistakes I made as a school admin. So, when we think about our intervention that I had in place, most schools or states have something, a timeline. Like after 5 days, you do this, 7 days, 10 days, whatever that cadence is. And for me, it was a lot of checking boxes rather than really thinking about what I can do to help support these families. And so one of the things I thought of I didn't do, but was changing the role of truancy officer to really community officer, because it's thinking about how do those families have a sense of community at our school. The other thing that I learned from was making sure we had a pathway of communication from that truancy community officer to the staff, because they're going to see trends. And many times we focus on why the student isn't coming, but we're not really talking about trends of what this person could actually bring to the staff and things that we could do differently. As I started to talk to family members, one thing that I realized was, as a team, we really need to have a sense of communication to our families about the purpose and structure of our lessons. So I was a high school principal. Sometimes when I met with a family, they were like, do you know what? In all truth, our kid didn't see the purpose of coming because there was always like, there was a work day or there was a substitute or they were going to do a test review and they didn't need to go. So really emphasizing in our websites what the lesson is, what they're going to take from that day, and what they're going to miss if they're not there. So what we tried to do is shift some of our conversations, really emphasizing the proficiency levels within the class to the parents, so they understood the urgency of why that lesson was important to their student. Also thinking about, sometimes I would hear parents, or I would see a student, we would look at a student who had missed 10 days, but they still had an A in the class. So there's a little bit of a gap between the grade and their participation. So really thinking about our lessons, engaging the students fully, and if not, how can we make those adjustments? And the last thing is we looked at some of our behavior policies and our referral process. So when I first started, we had a really high referral rate, and we looked at how we were talking to students and how we were avoiding escalation to where it was then a behavior issue and then they were out for the day. So really thinking about, as a staff, how do we address maybe a behavior that we don't want to have in the class? How do we redirect it? And once we saw those referrals drop, we saw our attendance rates rise and thus our graduation rates.
That's beautiful. All right, I'm already feeling inspired. This is really good. I would add something, feeding a little bit off of what you said, Patty, about understanding the reasons for things like absences. Within that reason, sometimes there's a real asset to be found in students. So the example you gave is they're taking care of siblings. That's why they're not in attendance. I would challenge everybody on this call to ask yourself the question as soon as you come up with a barrier for that student. And therefore, that is somewhat of an asset, because try to figure out what skills or abilities does it give that student that we can leverage in schools, because that's a pretty huge one. And another, I think a couple of questions came in, by the way. ESSA, I mentioned ESSA at the beginning. ESSA stands for the Every Student Succeeds Act, in case you're wondering what was that we were referencing. And then a question has also come in about language barriers. We're going to hit that one square on the head in just a little bit. So thank you for that question. So that was the first big question we wanted to start off with. Now let's get to, why are families leaving my district? And the big enrollment issue lingering out there. Student population drives the budget, but it also impacts the culture and climate of the school. So as we work together to build our school culture, families have a hard time understanding the purpose of the decisions, and it can be really frustrating for them. And as school district demographics are changing, this can be even more of a mismatch between your community and your schools. So alternatively, if well-resourced families are choosing alternate options, what does that change about your school demographics, and how are we going to adjust to those changes? So there's a lot going on here, all related though to the topic of enrollment. So strategies that help impact enrollment: communicate design and purpose of curriculum and policies. And we'll see early and often all over the place. I would go even a step further and say, when you have the opportunity to help co-design with families, the results are not only more equitable for all of your students, but they also help give voice free, and your students see themselves reflected through schools. How often do we hear schools say that? We need our students to see themselves in the schools. What better way than to bring families in during the co-design phase of some of the decisions that you're making? And then get feedback from parents and families often and with purpose. I love the with purpose being added. Families do not want to give you, I don't think there's a family out there that's like, oh, if only schools would survey us more. Plenty of surveys happening with families. If families know we are asking this question for this reason, and this is the action it's going to help drive, the results of your surveys will be increased and you'll have more impactful data. And then transparency and decision making for important policies, an opportunity for feedback and reflection. Families are tired of being rubber stamps to decisions that were already made. We really have to not want their feedback so they feel heard, but want their feedback so it actually informs a better outcome for all of us. They are the key. Families are the key. If you're wondering about the opportunity gap, the equity gap, the achievement gap, all the gap, families are a key in helping to close that. If we can get their voice, it's going to help our schools better reflect the communities they're serving, and just create opportunities for feedback that allows for members to participate and not just sign off. There's that rubber stamp. They don't want to be a rubber stamp. They want to give feedback that they know will help impact outcomes for their own child, but also for other students like their child. And acknowledge and reflect on the feedback that's not always positive. That one's a little harder to do. Improvement happens in those moments, though. The best innovation for a school district comes from family criticism sometimes. That's where we can help come up with innovative solutions. So with that, Patty, we'll start with you. What are the reasons we suspect enrollment is declining in many districts, and some of the strategies that you've seen maybe work to help improve enrollment?
Yeah, I think one of the key things that comes up over and over is students maybe not engaging because they don't see coming to school every day as relevant for what they want to do right in the future. So we are engaging in a long-term educational program and facilities plan called Blueprint APS in Aurora Public Schools. And one of the things we're thinking about is what are like real world engaging learning opportunities that students can get excited about that makes them want to come to school every day. So there's a range. We're creating magnet schools that revolve around themes like entrepreneurship and invention, STEAM, project-based learning. We just opened up an arts magnet as well. And then also leveraging some of the community strengths that we have in our area. So in our Northeast region, we have Amazon and the Gaylord Hotel. And so in that region, we have this specialization called business management and hospitality, but really thinking about those ways that can get students excited to come to school every day. This isn't like a pathway, meaning that students are locked into this, right? And they're just studying to become that, but just getting them engaged and thinking about learning in a new way.
Great. Thank you, Patty. And Simone, anything to add on to that?
Yeah, I think I'm going to say communication, 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 but that's two-way communication. So if as a principal, as a teacher, as a district, if we're not communicating our successes, but also asking our parents to identify what success looks like, then that will be filled by somebody else. So sometimes that's going to be by school rankings, by a website that will grade my school. And sometimes if I leave it up to that, then it's going to be deficit based. It's going to be based off of criteria that it's not always highlighting what we're successful in. So one of the things I did with my parents was really think about having a meeting and having a discussion of what does success look like for us in addition to the state requirements. So what at the end of the year do we want to end this year and saying this was a successful year, so that we're thinking of an asset-based mentality and not always here's the drawbacks. So, we mentioned polls, but really, like Kate said, having purpose with that feedback. And I've told this to Kate a couple of times. Many times, the families that were in my office kind of upset were the ones who stayed because they felt comfortable enough to come and talk to me. It was always when I got a slip from a parent that was leaving that I had never heard from that I was truly surprised. So, how do I create a structure, a framework where parents feel comfortable to give me feedback and know that I am going to reflect on that in a I'm not going to public way where I'm going to mention their name, but really say, here's what I'm hearing and here's the actions that we're doing and here's what's driving our actions. I know transparency is a word that we use a lot, but it's something that parents crave. They want to know what's the purpose behind our decisions, whether it's at the school, district, or class level. And I think that's it.
Yeah, I love that, Simone. I think transparency, not even them hearing exactly what they wanted to hear, but in them knowing what schools are doing and why they're doing it matters a lot to families. And by the way, the best PR you will ever find for your school district is happy families. Happy families who feel listened to, and even a step further, like their input is reflected then in the school. Those are the families who are going to tell other families, come, this is the place you want to be. I've seen it happen in school districts. A bunch of really good chat questions coming in as well. I do see one about a new attendance officer. I'll just in the moment. What are some resources you can use? Attendance Works is a national organization with some really good best practices around attendance. If you're looking for a one-stop shop of a good clearinghouse of a lot of good attendance resources, Attendance Works. You can just Google that, and a lot of good things that we actually take some best practices and have built it into our platform as well. So thank you. And now next, what about communication? What about it? And Simone, like you said, communication. What about that is going to help, and what kinds of communication will help us keep families and attract new families? So the districts really work hard to reach families through multiple channels. How can we cut through the noise and make sure that families are making decisions about where to enroll and have clear and compelling information? Like I said, I don't think you're going to find a family out there that says, give me another survey. I also don't think you're going to have a lot of families out there that say, give me, every time you communicate with me, can you do it 14 more ways? Like, I think you have to find the channels that are effective. And post-COVID, think about those contact warnings we had for families during COVID. They got so inundated so many times with so much communication. In some cases, more communication has led to no actual engagement. So we want to make sure that we're addressing that as well. So here we are with the PR again. The best PR for enrollment is from happy, empowered families and engaged families. So think about, what is one positive or empowering message, and what is one poll you could ask families. So this is really important. I think making it a calendar each month and asking one important question of your families, because engagement is not a one-way street. It is a two-way street. We want to be able to learn from our families. So, and then the other direction, what is the one most important piece of information in August to share with your families? What about September? What about October? If you can create a calendar of the most important information that you're sharing, so that families have a little more equal access to information about schools. And then what's the one thing you want to learn from your families? When you mention engagement, a lot of school districts slip into all the things they need to teach families mode. We also want to make sure that we're learning from families. And then first impressions are important. School district websites are often designed for current families, but they need to be designed for new families as well. What is the face you want to put forward to your community that helps explain this is the place for your child? And I will tell you, I am a parent. Many of you are parents. The first thing I don't want to hear about, honestly, is standards and curriculum. The first thing I want to hear is this is a welcoming place and that my child belongs here. The district will be better off for having my child in that district. So thinking about what is your front-facing first impression for families. And then make communication positive and proactive, which is hard to do when you're always in a fire drill mode. How can you get yourself ahead of it, and think about, maybe, yes, what do we have to communicate right now? But what about next month? What's our one big thing we want to push forward for next month? And look for a family's perspective and audit your communication. How do they want to be communicated with? Who are you missing with all of your current communication mechanisms? And then just get a few smart brains together. When in doubt, ask ask the families. If you can find one community member from a subset of your community district that you're not getting in contact with, it's worth the reach out to one person to say, why is this? Help me solve for this problem. So, a question here. What strategies have you used, Patty and Simone? And maybe we'll start with Patty again. What strategies have you used or even thought about using that would help families see the value in enrolling in a district and staying engaged with your district?
Yeah, Kate, great question. And I think we think about this at the school level a lot. One, very simple thing that schools have found really effective is reaching out to parents. If it's a quick daily update about something the student, maybe just one behavior in class that really, helped another student, and you can send a quick like talking points message to the parent guardian, just saying, hey, you should know your student did this today, and it really helped a fellow classmate stay engaged in the class. That little kudos, I think, it's small, doesn't take a lot of effort, but it shows the parent, wow, these people at my child's school care about them. They see their assets. They know how to applaud them for the right things and keep them engaged. So something small like that, but then also making sure you have structures at the school like an accountability committee, right? Or a PTA, or things that you're not only keeping them updated on the small great things, but also including them on big decisions that need to happen at the school level that impact their child's education. So just thinking through, what are the little small easy things that I can do, but also what are the intentional strategic structures that we have in place to make sure parents know that we're listening.
I love that, Patty. And when I hear strategic structures, I also think equity, like not just a one-off, nice to have, kind-hearted thing, but how are we building it into structures? I love that. Yeah, Simone, how about you?
Yeah, one of the things that we have going at local schools is one of the few community buildings that families can see themselves in and be comfortable in. Like, I think a family is going to be much more willing to come to a school than to the mayor's office and express their opinions. So one of the things that I tried to do was build off of the traditions that the community appreciated at the school. So where I taught, some of my families went to that school. And what I found is we did activities that built off of something they did when they were in high school is when we had the most participation. So really listening to the parents, and sometimes they'll tell you, hey, we used to do this and I miss this activity. So hearing from the community, what are traditions that are important to them and that they either want to continue or bring back? In that, also thinking about how are you incorporating the families who are new to the community? So how are you building new traditions to reflect your new population that's growing? And so it always makes me think about our communication. Many times my website was built for my current families. It was giving them information about classes and scheduling, but I didn't have a lot of information for new families. So when somebody moves into a neighborhood, they'll usually look at the school website to think about, what does this school look like for me and my family, and why should I choose this school rather than another option? So really looking at your website and asking yourself, does it have things in there that opens up opportunities for new families to want to come to your school? The other thing is, many times I would have a family move into the community, drop by unannounced, and they would come to our front desk, and it's busy at 8 o'clock. The secretary signing tardy slips, we're trying to get things going, and they would sit there. So having something in place, a structure, a package that's a welcome to my school, we want you here. You are an important part of our community. So that was having something that even if the secretary was busy, she could get them started, and then maybe even having student ambassadors give the student a tour. Something that's going to welcome a family if they were to show up at my office on a Monday morning unannounced.
I love that. And this question, by the way, has spurred a lot of questions coming in through chat. So we will address the questions during Q&A, but your questions seem to all be related to addressing barriers to communicating with families. That happens to be the sweet spot for us at Talking Points. So we'll tell you a little bit about how we can help with some of those barriers at the end. But thank you. Keep the questions coming. We really appreciate that. So last of our 4 questions to guide the conversation today. What are efforts and data points I can measure to help overall funding and meet the requirements for funding? So we're back to sort of where we started. How do we make sure that we're setting ourselves up well in the area of funding through the mechanisms of increasing attendance and enrollment and graduation? So schools need to examine practices critically. And I know self-examination of those practices, we know there's plenty of criticism of schools right now. Let's take power and let's look at things critically ourselves to determine which practices shifts could lead to increased funding. Attendance, enrollment, levies, and bonds. Think about this for a moment. Those are all money drivers in schools. Enrollment, huge money driver. Levies and bonds in some of your communities, your students literally, their programming lives and dies by whether you can get those levies and bonds to pass. And then also attendance. In some states, attendance is the driver for a lot of funding, and chronic absenteeism can take away from that. Think about those things for a moment. What do they all have in common? They are the primary things where families, it's contingent on family involvement. You don't pass levies and bonds with families that don't want to be a part of your school. It's hard to get students to enroll without the family being on board with it, and even attendance. So the biggest drivers for dollars are dependent on our families. This isn't a nice to have. This is critical. So strategy 4, which families might be left out of current practices and processes? It's really, really important not to say we got a 50% return rate on a survey, but rather, who are the families we heard from? Who are the families we didn't? And we always say, but it's unintentional. We keep sending it out with the best, it's just sort of unintentional that we left families out. Anytime you say it's unintentional, flip it around and say, how can we be intentional to reach those families? And state report cards, reports on attendance and enrollment, graduation rates are all summative. What are the formative metrics along the way before you find out at the end of the year where you landed? What are the things you can do throughout the year so that you can make pivots and improve things before you reach those summative metrics? And families are the answer to many, many funding woes. And in fact, nearly all of them really depend on families. The moral imperative to partner with families can work in concert with the fiscal imperative. This isn't just about dollars. What are dollars for in schools? They're for services for students. That's why it matters so much. But in the process of meeting the fiscal imperative, guess what you're doing? You're doing the right thing for students and for your community. So with that last question, I will turn over to Patty and then Simone. How can schools ensure families want to support the school, that they feel driven to support the district? And how can you make clear the value add for families on a daily basis?
Yeah, Kate, I think this is something we think about at the district level all the time. And one really key piece in setting the culture, I think, for our district, district-wide, has been our strategic plan. I think that has really gotten families to understand that they are truly our partners in education, that they are in the driver's seat with their student, right? Determining where their student wants to go. And then we always talk about our goals that are very simple. Every student needs a plan for their future. Every student needs skills to implement that plan. Every student needs credentials, right, when they leave our doors. And then we just added a 4th goal around community of support. So pretty simple, right? But it really lays out that students, families are in the driver's seat. We as staff are the support team around them, right, on that racetrack. If students and families understand, oh, these are things I have to do every day to ensure, right, my successful future later. And these are the people helping me get there. That's, why they want to be engaged in our school, our district, and make sure they're attending every day. And so it just culturally, I think it's been huge for our district. And the data will show that as well, right? We have increased graduation rates more than 25% in the past decade in our district. And our dropout rate is at a historic low. So, when students and families really understand why it's important, then they're the ones, right, who are in that driver's seat and pushing every day.
Hey, at the two schools that I worked at, or two of the schools I worked at, sometimes what we would see is money would come to us because we had low rates, attendance issues or proficiency or graduation rates, and we were doing everything under the sun, but sometimes we were doing duplicate work. So, really thinking about that, the idea of opportunities with purpose. So I was saying yes to every grant, every initiative, but I really had to sit down and think about where are we duplicating the efforts and where can we create a scope and sequence within our site or within our district that's going to make sense to our parents. So if parents are getting newsletters that there's so many activities that they can join, but not really understanding the purpose and how these activities build upon each other, then I'm missing out on that opportunity. So really thinking about what is it that we have at our school that's based around attendance, proficiency level, and graduation rates, and how do these grants work together? So then we're really focused as a district, as a school, and then it makes sense to our parents of what we're doing and how it actually serves their students.
I love that, Simone. And I think grants in particular are can be such an amazing tool, but also something that ultimately doesn't support some initiatives. So thinking really about grants, how sustainable are they? And if not, what are the best ways to use one-time money in school districts is really important. You would not certainly use maybe a holiday bonus from pay to pay for your electric bill, and that's your plan, because an electric bill is something that comes every month. So really thinking thoughtfully about combining resources, looking at your needs overall, and looking for gaps and redundancies. I love that. We never think we have the leeway to do that in schools. I think we really don't have the leeway not to anymore, really thinking about it more holistically. So I love everything, the entire conversation so far. We are going to move into Q&A, and I will tell you, you've been like the chat box is sort of hopping right now. I would say the questions fit into two categories. First question is about what about barriers to communication, language barriers, technology barriers, all of those barriers. We're actually going to address that in just a moment through that's what our mission is as a nonprofit, is really help address those barriers. So we'll talk about those in a moment. But the other category of questions are a little bit broader. So here are a couple of those. Let me pull them up. First question, specific to graduation, what are some things that have been done successfully that we have seen in our time? So I might, yeah, Patty, I might turn it over to you for that if you have any practical experience in that area in Aurora.
Yeah, and I understand this might not be doable in every district because it is a heavily fund. You need funding for this. But we created college and career centers in every single one of our high schools that actually our foundation is funding, and those positions have been so wonderful. It's literally an area where kids can go to talk with their college and career success advisor, everything from FAFSA to applications to internships. It's just a great space for students to, start exploring, ask questions, get connected to opportunities and things. So that's something I think that's been really great, and it's wonderful that we have one of those centers in all of our high schools.
That's great. I would add prevention and early intervention when it comes to at risk for not graduating are key. We all know some of those risk indicators early on. The highest correlated factor to those not graduating is failure rate in ninth grade, which for obvious reasons they're starting with a credit deficit if they end up failing classes in ninth grade. So that's one group to look at. I brought up truancy earlier. Truancy is a big deal. It's not that students have chronic absenteeism, it's that those absences are unexcused, and that's what puts them in the truancy category. You will not find many more high risk for not graduating than those that end up in the category of truancy in schools. So think about what you could do in Aurora specifically. We're trying some things out to help give families easier mechanisms to give reason for absence. That's important because you can actually intervene earlier because you understand why, which is really important. But also, as soon as that little absence in your student information system shifts from unexcused to excused, you would not believe the long-term impact for students. So as soon as they have enough unexcused absences and the legal system gets involved and they feel like quicksand, every move is dropping them lower, a lot of them have the response of dropping out. So there are a couple of things tied to graduation rate. We have a few other questions here. What does all of this work? How do you even make it happen with all the high staff turnover or lack of staffing that we have in schools? So, Simone, anything in regards to that question? We have staff turnover. How do we do all this? It all sounds great, but what are we supposed to do when we're in a crisis mode with staffing?
I'm really thinking it's having that structure and purpose in place that's communicated to your parents so that, and to your families, so that it's, if you have a new admin that turns over every year, that all the policies, all the work you've done doesn't leave with the old admin. So that there's a structure in place and it's really about the community rather than the new leader coming in and making changes that people don't understand and that will go away in a year. So really having something in place that stays with the school and with the purpose and structure and goals of the school. And then as the staff come and go, which that does happen, they feel more secure as they come into a place that has that in place for them.
Great. Here's a hot topic, a term I'd never heard until the last year. We're losing students to these education pods. So during COVID, there are families who found each other in the midst of, oh, we're all going virtual. We all have to help support students. They found little coalitions of other families that they're working with. They like that feeling. They like that flexibility and autonomy. And some of them haven't returned back to their schools. So a question was asked of me recently, very related to this question. What do we do about that? But more importantly, their question was, the problem pods have is they don't have all the resources that K-12 schools have. So they're dealing with very few resources, but with this awesome autonomy and flexibility. So the question was, how do we get more resources to pods, when the reverse of the question is probably the one we need to be asking? How do we get that flexibility and feeling of excitement and enthusiasm into schools that those pods are experiencing? So any ideas in that area, Simone or Patty? How do we give families the feeling that they're so seeking after coming out of COVID with all of that autonomy through the K-12 system?
Yeah, something we talk about really frequently is, does every student in the building have a trusted adult who they can go with? And that's got to be a big right plus that people love about the learning pods, is that small, really relationship centered approach that, a student feels like they have somebody every day who they rely on. So, from the school level, are we thinking about every student in our building, and does every single student in our building have somebody who they know that they can, talk with if something is tough in their lives? And it's not always the classroom teacher, right? It might be a support staff member who they see in the hallway during passing periods. So just, I think, really being thoughtful about that and thinking through the students you have, and who those adults are is really important.
I love that, Patty. I've actually seen some districts to have, maybe you all have seen it before, but they'll pull up actually the yearbook picture of all their students and make sure each one has someone attached to each student, We're also seeing districts start to do that with families, which families have not received a positive, engaging message in the last month, and who's going to be sending those messages to those families. So we've seen it both directions, as well as the house system coming back. Houses used to be like, they were a really hot craze for a while, especially in the middle schools. But bringing so seventh through, eighth grade, or sixth and seventh and fifth and sixth and seventh grade, having all students in the same house, so a little community within the school. We're seeing that come back and also be implemented at the high school level, which isn't something I'd ever seen before. Anything else, Simone, in regards to this question? How do we bring that the learning pod feel into the K-12 system?
I don't have a great answer for the learning pod feel, but I do think being creative in how we are reaching out to our community. So I was in charge of a grant, and we would have a lot of family nights, but that also required that families got transportation, or got off of work, or had had daycare. So one of the things we did is I would set up a stand outside the dollar store, uh, and I would have information there, and parents knew a certain day of the month I would be there. We used our buses to deliver information. So I saw somebody reach out about, what about in a community that doesn't have internet? That's my community. So making sure we're using phones. If we need to send things home, we use the bank within our town that had a message board that just let families know, hey, we're going to be sending things home with your students through the bus on this day. So really thinking about how we're reaching our families beyond the normal, here's the website, because not all of our families have that website.
I love that. So we thank you for the questions. The questions sometimes are the bulky, meaty, best part of a whole presentation, and you didn't let us down. These are great questions. The other bucket of your questions fell into the category of what I would call barriers to good engagement or communication with families. And that is what we are about at Talking Points. So, who are we? What is this all about? We are a nonprofit organization built around text message communication with families. So, a school member will send a message in English. Families all receive that message in their home language. They can respond. Two-way is really important. They can respond in their home language, and the message is received back by the teacher in English. So by default, we use text messaging because we found it to be the most barrier-free way to communicate with all families. We do also have a family app. So from a school member side, you're typing on your keyboard through the app. Families are receiving it via text message, but can also default into an app if they would like. We have 125 languages. There was a great language question that came through. Actually, I believe we just released 20 more languages. I think we're up to 145 since we first turned in our slide deck here. So a massive amount of languages available. We have our own AI translation that we've developed. It is K-12 contextualized. It's not just Google Translate. And I know we're kind of hard on Google. Like, Google's done incredible things to increase access to language for families, but we go a level beyond for the K-12 system. So completely K-12 contextualized with a layer of human translators in the picture as well. When a message can't be understood, we bring in human translators to retranslate and then feed that back into the machine translation. Lots of equity-based features, text to speech, speech to text. Readability flag is assigned to the teacher and lets the teacher know this message is over a sixth grade reading level, which is not best practice for mass communication with families, or it's not well constructed for translation. So teachers and staff members get in-app guidance on how to write good messages to families, and then an education glossary built into the platform itself. So you see IEP in a message. We all know what that means. It's the secret handshake of schools. Not every family knows, and especially once translated. Guess what IEP in another language is? The same three letters in another language. It doesn't mean anything. So adding in context around that and building in the glossaries. Our impact, if you're thinking, oh, I've never heard of Talking Points, we're actually kind of all over the place. We have 90, and who cares about that if the impact wasn't there? So 98% of teachers have reached families they haven't been able to reach before when using Talking Points. 100% of non English-speaking families are more engaged based on our feedback from schools with their child's school than they were before Talking Points, and 93% of educators saw improved student outcomes. We have just released the first of its kind an actual causal study results, research study, which have shown an increase in English scores, math scores, and a decrease in attendance through the use of Talking Points. So we're actually here, we have a research arm that's here to actually measure the impact we're having. And 90% of families feel more included in school communities. That matters a lot. I want them, my goal in education is not for have families feel included or welcomed, but for them to be a part of the school community. And this can help get you to move that direction. So we are here to relentlessly remove systemic barriers to effective, equitable family engagement, not just so we can engage, though. It's for the success and well-being of each and every student. So our whole goal is impact on students. And 2 out of 3 schools actually are using Talking Points in some form. Hundreds of millions of conversations have taken place in all 50 states. If you're interested at all, please reach out to partners@talkingpoints.org, and you can see we're in all the socials. So feel free to pick the one of your choice, and then also feel free to reach out to Patty, myself, or Simone directly as well.
Yeah, Kate, if I can just add, I think we're one of your districts that uses Talking Points the most, like one of the highest use districts in the country. It's just been an incredible tool for our schools. We are a district that's committed to providing multilingual communication. So we translate all our district level messages into our top 10 languages. We have a welcome center where there are tons of liaisons that work with families in multiple languages. And we have district approved interpreters in all different languages that work with families. But even with all of those things, Talking Points is just such an incredible technology tool that allows us to go further and keep that two-way communication tool open. So just it's been great. And our schools use Talking Points like crazy.
Thank you, Patty. That warms my heart, and I know Simone too. So if you're not already using it, please reach out to us. Our goal is to help every single district help improve outcomes for all of your students. Thank you mostly for attending. We are so excited.